Hey guys, tonight we are stepping into the glittering streets of the Tang Dynasty's capital, Chang'an, where silks ripple in the breeze, street vendors shout out deals on roasted chestnuts, and an ox cart loaded with freshly imported spices squeezes past you in a narrow alley. It's one of those moments where history feels alive, where you almost smell the blend of sesame oil, incense, and the faintly alarming tang of horse manure that seems to hang in the background. You're about to wander a city so massive, so cosmopolitan, that you probably won't survive this evening without tripping over at least 3 scholars quoting poetry at each other. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you feel like sharing, post your location and your local time. I always love knowing when and where you're tuning in. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You find yourself walking along Chang'an's avenues, wide boulevards laid out in a rigid grid, lined with walls that hide sprawling mansions and humble workshops alike. This city is enormous, nearly 2 million souls when it's at its peak, bigger than any European city for centuries to come. You shuffle along with the crowd, brushing past traders in turbans, Korean envoys in stiff hats, and monks from India with travel-worn robes. It's a city where languages collide: Persian, Sogdian, Sanskrit, and of course Chinese, and you realize you could order dumplings in one corner and pistachios from Persia in another. Historians still argue whether Chang'an should be considered the world's first truly globalized city. But as you step over a stray chicken and nearly collide with a camel, it certainly feels like it. On either side of you, shop fronts beckon. One glitters with embroidered silks, dyed in vivid blues and greens, using minerals ground into powder finer than powdered sugar. Another reeks of medicinal herbs, ginseng roots displayed like prized treasures, deer antlers stacked beside jars of dried geckos. A woman selling hairpins carved from jade shouts over the clang of a blacksmith hammering iron in the next stall. You duck under a canopy of bright cloth and catch sight of lacquered boxes, so glossy they reflect your bemused face back at you. These markets aren't quiet. Imagine the sensory overload of a modern shopping mall mixed with a farmer's market and a music festival, and you're close. You pause at a spice stall where little pyramids of cinnamon and star anise sit in neat rows. The merchant insists you sniff a jar of cloves, freshly arrived via maritime trade routes stretching all the way from the Moluccas. It's pungent enough to make your eyes water, but you nod politely, tucking away the scent like a tourist souvenir. Did Tang citizens really cook with these all the time? Maybe. Maybe not. Historians still argue whether such exotic spices were daily kitchen fare or mostly elite indulgences. Either way, you imagine some noble household sprinkling cloves into their wine, and you can't help smirking at the thought of someone in the 8th century discovering bad breath cures that sound suspiciously like you're chewing gum. Street performers dot the corners, a boy with a monkey clapping cymbals, a contortionist bending backwards in ways that make your spine twinge, and a storyteller drawing a small crowd with tales of generals and demons. The storyteller's voice rises and falls dramatically, and you realize he's the ancient equivalent of your Netflix binge. Low budget, lots of imagination, and way too addictive. You linger for a moment, caught up in the rhythm of his voice, then shuffle onward before someone passes a basket for coins. Past the performers, you come upon silk dealers displaying bolts of fabric in sunlight. They shimmer like flowing water, and you run your fingers along one, cool, impossibly smooth. Once upon a time, Chinese silk was smuggled across borders and caused diplomatic headaches for empires desperate to crack its secret. Now, under Tang rule, silk isn't just trade, it's status. Nobles wrap themselves in gowns that could blind an onlooker with brightness. You try not to picture the laundry bill. Of course, not everyone's here to shop. Government officials stride down the avenue, entourages trailing behind like shadows. You overhear a clerk muttering about grain quotas while another calculates tax revenue in a notebook. Somewhere behind high walls, aristocrats host garden parties. But for now, the streets belong to you and the sea of ordinary people. You catch a whiff of grilled lamb skewers and veer toward a food stall. The vendor hands you a stick dripping with oil, the scent of cumin and chili making your stomach growl. You bite in and nearly burn your tongue. Worth it. Quirky fact, cumin isn't even native here. It was introduced via Central Asia, and now it's indispensable to Tang barbecue. Further along, you glimpse the East Market's massive gates, guarded by officials who make sure the stalls inside close precisely at curfew. The Tang capital is orderly, sometimes absurdly so. Bells ring out the hours, curfews are strictly enforced, and night patrols keep wandering troublemakers in check. Historians still argue whether this level of control kept Chang'an safe or just suffocated its nightlife. Either way, you realize if you linger too late, you'll be shut out with nowhere to sleep but under a cart. You quicken your pace. The sun dips lower and lanterns flicker to life. Their orange glow softens the dust and noise, turning the market into something dreamlike. The crowd thins slightly, but the energy lingers. Children tugging their parents toward sweet cellars, monks gliding past with shaved heads gleaming, and merchants tallying the day's profits with fingers stained by ink and coin. You find yourself swaying to the faint notes of a flute drifting from a tavern, a reminder that while commerce is the lifeblood of Chang'an, pleasure is never far away. A quick side note, your sandals are dusted brown by now, and your throat's a little parched. You grab a cup of barley tea from a passing vendor, lukewarm but refreshing, and sip as you lean against a wall. You watch the flow of people, faces lit by lantern light, stories written in wrinkles and laughter. And you realize this isn't just shopping, it's social theater. Who wears what, who's seen with whom, who spends lavishly, and who counts copper coins. Chang'an streets are the empire's gossip columns in motion. By the time the bells ring again, you've walked half the avenue, sampled foods you can't quite identify, and memorized enough faces to last a lifetime. You wonder, just for a moment, if people centuries from now will wander malls or airports and think of them as we think of Chang'an, overwhelming, absurd, and weirdly beautiful. The silks shimmer behind you, the spices fade into the air, and the city hums, never fully quiet, never fully still. You step forward, deeper into its heartbeat, as if the streets themselves are pulling you toward the next curiosity. You shuffle your way out of the marketplace, brushing crumbs of roasted chestnut from your sleeve, when the smell of something altogether more extravagant catches your attention. Rich broth, roasted meats, the faint sweetness of fruit wine. It's the unmistakable lure of an imperial Banquet. You're not exactly on the guest list, but let's be real. In a city like Chang'an, you can always slip in behind a nervous servant carrying a tray, and no one will question it if you look like you belong. So, with your best, I'm totally supposed to be here face, you follow the scent and step into one of the Tang Dynasty's most dazzling rituals of leisure and excess, the banquet. The hall is cavernous, columns painted in vermilion and capped with golden lotuses, so polished you can see your own stunned reflection. Rows of low tables stretch across the floor, each one a stage for culinary theater. Dishes arrive in waves, steamed buns stuffed with minced lamb, platters of river fish glazed in soy and honey, bowls of pickled vegetables that crunch satisfyingly with every bite. You sit cross-legged, trying not to knock over the lacquerware with your elbows. Around you, courtiers and scholars are already deep into debates about poetry, philosophy, and, judging by the raised voices, who makes the best broth. A servant pours you a cup of wine, not the grape variety, but Huangjiu, fermented from rice and millet. It's cloudy, aromatic, and deceptively strong. You take a cautious sip and feel warmth spread through your chest, the kind of warmth that tells you 2 cups from now, you'll probably think reciting poetry is a good idea. Historians still argue whether Tang banquets were primarily about food or about the performance of culture. But honestly, with flavors like this, you can imagine the answer being both. On the table before you, a dish glistens. Roast duck lacquered in sauce until its skin is crisp as autumn leaves. You crack into it, the crunch echoing in your ears, and the meat beneath practically melts. Quirky fact: some Tang cooks experimented with stuffing ducks with dates or chestnuts before roasting, the medieval equivalent of chef's special twist. You imagine a cook proudly presenting his invention only for some cranky courtier to mutter, "Too sweet." Culinary innovation hasn't changed much, has it? Meanwhile, a group of poets down the table is engaged in what can only be described as a tipsy duel of words. One raises his cup and, without missing a beat, strings together a 4-line verse about the moonlight glinting off his soup. The next responds with a cheeky rhyme comparing that soup to the Empress's complexion. The crowd roars with laughter, and the poets smirk like rock stars basking in applause. You realize quickly that in Tang society, reciting poetry at a banquet is like whipping out a guitar at a party. Everyone's impressed until you overdo it. Your focus drifts to the fruit platters, artfully arranged with pears, pomegranates, and lychees. Lychees, especially, are a luxury. Fragile, perishable, and hauled across great distances to satisfy imperial cravings. There's even a legend that Emperor Xuanzong ordered fast horses to deliver fresh lychees to his beloved concubine Yang Guifei, all so she could taste them before they spoiled. Historians still argue whether this story is exaggerated court gossip or historical fact, but either way, it's deliciously dramatic. You pop one in your mouth and nearly choke on the sweetness. Worth the hype. Between courses, musicians wander in, pipa players plucking strings so delicately you wonder if they're trying not to disturb the soup. Dancers follow, sleeves flowing like waves, steps so precise they look choreographed by geometry itself. You lean back, half full, half drowsy, and let the rhythm lull you. This isn't just entertainment, it's subtle messaging. The empire is prosperous, cultured, secure enough to devote hours to beauty and indulgence. You remind yourself not to nod off in your bowl. A waiter sets down a plate of something unfamiliar, translucent jelly made from boiled animal tendons, chilled until it wobbles like modern gelatin. The texture surprises you, slippery, cold, vaguely savory. Some nobles swear by it as a summer delicacy, while others probably made excuses to avoid it. You grin at the thought of Tang aristocrats having the same reaction you do to Jell-O at a picnic. Polite enthusiasm, hiding quiet horror. At the far end of the hall, a debate grows louder. A pair of scholars are locked in argument, not over politics, not over war strategy, but over the proper garnish for a soup of lotus root. One insists ginger is essential, while the other claims garlic alone brings out the flavor. Their table mates sigh, accustomed to such passionate disagreements. You smirk into your cup, realizing food fights don't always involve throwing anything. The banquet continues with dish after dish, dumplings shaped like little moons, skewers of venison sprinkled with salt, and tofu simmered with fragrant herbs. Yes, tofu. It's not the bland stereotype you may picture. Tang cooks mastered ways to transform bean curd into spiced, textured marvels. You chew thoughtfully, wondering how many modern food trends are just rediscoveries of ancient ingenuity. The servants refill your cup again, and now the room is buzzing. Laughter bounces off the walls, someone's singing off-key, and you're tempted to join the poetry contest yourself, with a verse about how you can't feel your legs anymore from sitting cross-legged too long. You hold back, probably for the best. Across the hall, one over-enthusiastic official collapses into a nap right on his table, head resting in a pile of steamed buns. No one seems to mind. In fact, someone drapes a silk sleeve over him like a blanket. Toward the end, the dessert arrives. Honey cakes, sesame balls filled with sweet bean paste, candied fruits glistening like jewels. You pick up a sesame ball, bite in, and nearly burn your tongue on the molten filling inside. Classic mistake. A court lady across the table giggles at your expression, and you're suddenly glad you didn't try your hand at poetry. As the banquet winds down, the musicians play softer, the candles burn lower, and the chatter turns to whispers. You feel heavy, not just from food, but from the sheer weight of spectacle. This isn't dinner, it's theater, diplomacy, social climbing, and sensory overload all rolled into one. You stand, wobbling a little, and make your way toward the exit. Behind you, the hall hums on, a bubble of excess in a world that, outside those red walls, is much less gilded. You step back into the cool night air, belly full, ears still ringing with music, and mind buzzing with images of roasted duck, poetry contests, and the eternal question: garlic or ginger? The city stretches before you, lanterns flickering like stars, promising more curiosities to come. And with one last deep breath of night-scented air, you drift back into the streets, wondering where the Tang night will lead you next. You wipe the last crumbs of sesame cake from your fingers and follow the drifting scent of something warmer, sharper, and far more addictive than rice wine. A group of monks in saffron robes glide past you, each carrying a small porcelain cup filled with a steaming, pale green liquid. You tilt your head, curious, and then it hits you. The earthy, grassy aroma of tea. Not the bagged supermarket stuff you toss into mugs today, but Tang Dynasty tea, frothy, powdered, and surprisingly sophisticated. This isn't just a drink. It's a lifestyle, practically a cultural revolution in a cup. You find yourself seated in a tea house, the wooden benches polished smooth by countless visitors before you. The server brings out a bowl of powdered tea, ground from leaves so finely that they resemble jade dust. Hot water is poured in, and with a bamboo whisk, the liquid foams into a soft, frothy surface. You watch the bubbles rise, then collapse, as the steam curls upward. When you take your first sip, it's grassy, bitter, slightly astringent, and yet oddly refreshing. Historians still argue whether Tang tea culture really set the stage for Japan's later tea ceremonies, or whether the two developed separately. But either way, you feel like you're tasting history itself. As you sip, you notice the tea house isn't just a place to drink. It's buzzing with energy. Merchants negotiating contracts over cups, scholars scribbling lines of verse on scraps of paper, and a young couple whispering in a corner, their teacups clinking nervously like accomplices in a secret romance. The room hums with chatter, the kind of atmosphere you'd recognize instantly if you've ever sat in a crowded cafe. Swap the porcelain bowls for lattes and laptops, and you're basically at a Tang-era Starbucks. On your table, a dish of tea snacks appears, little pastries made with sesame, dried fruits, and honey. They're chewy, sticky, and perfectly designed to balance the bitterness of the tea. You pop one into your mouth and nearly glue your teeth shut. Quirky fact: some Tang households even mix tea with onion, ginger, and orange peel, a concoction that sounds more like a dare than a drink. Still, people swore by it, claiming it improved digestion. You imagine some skeptical courtier taking a sip and muttering, "This tastes like regret," before politely finishing the bowl. The monks at the next table chant softly, their voices blending with the clatter of cups. For them, tea isn't just refreshment. It's spiritual fuel, a way to stay awake during long nights of meditation. You catch yourself wondering how many philosophical insights or cosmic debates were sparked by one too many cups of bitter brew. Historians still argue whether tea was first embraced more by Buddhist monks or by bored courtiers trying to stay alert during endless banquets. But either way, the habit spread like wildfire. Outside, tea stalls line the street, each with its own secret recipe or brewing style. One vendor boasts that his tea leaves come from the misty mountains of Sichuan. Another insists his are dried in bamboo baskets for extra fragrance. You sip from one stall, then another, and realize you're developing what people today would call a caffeine problem. The Tang people, of course, didn't frame it that way. They saw tea as medicine, as art, even as poetry in liquid form. Speaking of poetry, you're barely halfway through your second bowl when a scholar plops down beside you and recites a verse about how tea clears the mind and sharpens the soul. His robe smells faintly of ink and sleep deprivation. You nod politely, because what else can you do when someone starts waxing lyrical about their drink? He smiles, satisfied, and moves on to another table, already preparing his next audience. You sigh in relief, realizing poets really were the influencers of their day, constantly selling you their vibe whether you asked for it or not. You tilt your cup and notice how the tea leaves, once settled, form strange shapes along the bottom. Some people, you're told, claim to read fortunes from the patterns, tiny leafy omens predicting love, luck, or doom. Quirky little side note: some Tang hosts probably exaggerated their leaf-reading skills to impress guests. Imagine someone staring into your cup and gravely announcing, "You will trip on a chicken tomorrow," and then actually being right. The tea itself is sometimes salted, sometimes mixed with herbs, sometimes sweetened with honey. Every household seems to have its own preferred recipe, and arguments break out about which is superior. You overhear two men loudly debating whether tea should be whisked into foam or boiled with seasonings, each one insisting his grandmother's method is clearly the only correct one. You smile into your cup, thinking how little humanity changes. Whether it's tea, coffee, or pizza toppings, someone's always ready to start a culinary war. By now, your heart is beating just a little faster, the kind of buzz you get when caffeine sneaks up on you. You glance around the tea house and notice others tapping their fingers, eyes bright, voices quickening. Tea doesn't just keep you awake. It oils the gears of conversation, lubricates the mind for poetry contests, business deals, or even gossip sessions. You imagine a Tang official returning home after 6 cups, jittery and scribbling policy ideas that make absolutely no sense in the morning. As the evening deepens, lanterns are lit, casting warm pools of light across the tables. The server brings you another bowl, unasked, and you accept it like a gift. Outside, the streets of Chang'an are cooling, but here in the tea house, the air is thick with steam, laughter, and the clink of porcelain. You lean back, cradle the cup in your hands, and think, this is comfort, this is culture, this is caffeine centuries before Red Bull. The monks finish their chanting, the merchants wrap up their deals, and the young couple slips out into the night, still whispering. You remain a little longer, savoring the last sips, knowing you're part of a ritual that has endured for over 1,000 years. The froth fades, the warmth lingers, and as you finally rise from your bench, you feel both restless and serene, ready to wander back into the Tang night. You step back into the streets with your veins practically buzzing from the tea, and instead of letting the caffeine drive you into a restless night of pacing, you decide to follow the flow of people heading toward something calmer. Lanterns bob gently in the hands of strolling families, and the path leads you away from the noisy markets into quieter quarters where the air smells faintly of blossoms. Before long, you find yourself standing before the gates of a noble estate, its walls whitewashed, its wooden doors etched with elegant carvings of cranes and clouds. Someone important clearly lives here, and tonight, the gates are open to visitors. You slip inside, curious to see how the Tang elite really spent their leisure hours. The first thing that hits you is the greenery. The garden sprawls before you like a carefully choreographed dream, with winding paths of pebble and moss leading past ponds, pavilions, and little groves of bamboo that sway and whisper secrets in the breeze. You wander forward slowly, shoes crunching softly, and realize this isn't a wild landscape at all. It's engineered serenity. Everything is deliberate, from the angle of the rocks to the way the koi glide in lazy loops, their orange and white scales flashing under moonlight. Historians still argue whether these gardens were meant primarily as private retreats for meditation or as ostentatious stages for showing off wealth. But honestly, as you admire a peony bush so lush, it looks like it's plotting to devour a pavilion. It's hard not to believe it's both. Noble families in Tang China didn't just own houses. They owned curated worlds. You pass under a trellis of wisteria, the blooms hanging in purple clusters, their perfume making the whole air feel heavy. Ahead, an ornate pavilion sits beside a lotus pond. You step inside, sit cross-legged on the cool stone floor, and watch as the moon reflects across the water. Lotus blossoms open their pale faces to the night, and frogs croak in a rhythm so steady it's practically a lullaby. You imagine the noble host here inviting guests to sip wine and compose poems, their verses drifting as lightly as the petals. One courtier might compare the blossoms to imperial beauty. Another might get cheeky and compare them to dumplings. Both are valid. A servant approaches and offers you a tray of chilled fruit. You take a slice of melon, sweet and crisp, and it instantly quenches the heat lingering in your throat from the earlier wine. It's easy to forget you're in the 8th century. The vibe is suspiciously close to a modern garden party, minus the Bluetooth speaker. Quirky fact: some nobles went so far as to hire gardeners specifically trained in arranging rocks. That's right. Whole careers existed in the careful stacking of stones to look naturally perfect. You chuckle at the thought of someone bragging at a banquet. My rock guy? Oh, he's the best in the province. As you stroll deeper, you encounter an artificial hillock dotted with tiny pines. From the top, the view unfolds, pavilions scattered like jewels, lanterns floating on ponds, and in the distance, the faint glow of Chang'an streets. It feels like you've stepped into a painting, and that's no accident. Tang gardens were designed with paintings and poetry in mind. A scholar might sit here for hours, brush in hand, trying to capture the essence of a cloud over a pond. Historians still argue whether these gardens were more about inspiration or self-promotion, but either way, the message is clear. Leisure here means beauty, and beauty means power. You pause at a bridge arched gracefully over a pond, watching as koi nibble at the water's surface. A child leans over the railing beside you, scattering crumbs, and the fish dart forward in a sudden glittering frenzy. The child giggles, and you realize not everything here is lofty art and subtle symbolism. Sometimes it's just fun to watch fat fish wiggle for snacks. The child's nurse hurries over, whispering that the koi are worth more than her yearly wages, and you both step back nervously. Further on, you pass a group of guests clustered around a bamboo grove. They're listening to the rustle of leaves, nodding solemnly, as though the sound contains profound wisdom. You tilt your head and yes, it's soothing, like nature's ASMR track. You imagine someone back then proudly telling their friends, "I don't need music, I've got bamboo." Of course, nearby, musicians strum soft notes on guqin anyway, because even serenity benefits from a soundtrack. In one corner of the estate, you stumble upon a small aviary. Exotic birds flutter and chirp, peacocks preen their tails, and tiny songbirds warble tunes so sweet you momentarily forget the city outside. The nobles adored collecting rare animals, not just for amusement, but as proof of their empire's reach. Quirky fact: records suggest some families even kept trained parrots that recited poems. Imagine sipping wine while a bird squawks. Your hair looks messy, in perfect rhyme. You can't decide if that's charming or nightmare fuel. Night deepens, and the garden transforms. Lanterns hung from trees and pavilions cast shimmering reflections across the ponds. The moonlight mingles with the glow, and suddenly the whole estate feels like it's floating between worlds. Guests recline on mats, sipping tea, gossiping about court scandals, or, inevitably, arguing over the best poetic metaphor for moonlight. You lie back on the grass for a moment, staring at the stars peeking through bamboo leaves, and think, this is the Tang version of Netflix and chill. just with fewer dragons and more chrysanthemums. Yet, not all gardens were about relaxation. Some nobles turned them into arenas for subtle political maneuvers. A quiet stroll with the right person could mean forging alliances, securing promotions, or plotting the downfall of a rival. Historians still argue whether most deals were struck in government halls or gardens like these, but it's easy to see how the setting helps. Nothing says, "Trust me," quite like a koi pond. As you finally circle back toward the entrance, you catch sight of a gardener trimming a bonsai tree under lamplight, scissors snipping with the precision of surgery. He doesn't notice you, too absorbed in shaping a tiny pine into a vision of miniature perfection. You smile, recognizing the same human impulse you've seen across centuries, the need to control a little piece of nature, to craft order from chaos, and to call it beautiful. The gates loom ahead, and as you step back into the streets of Chang'an, you carry the scent of peonies and lotus blossoms with you. Behind you, the noble estate hums on, lanterns glowing, koi circling endlessly, scholars searching for metaphors that never quite land. You exhale slowly, your heart softer, calmer, but still buzzing from tea and whispers of moonlight on water. The city awaits, but for a moment, you carry a private garden inside your head. And it feels like a secret worth keeping. The night air in Chang'an still smells faintly of lotus and lantern oil as you wander back toward the busy quarters. But this time, the laughter you hear isn't from poets in gardens. It's sharper, quicker, punctuated by bursts of clapping and the occasional groan of defeat. You round a corner and discover a small crowd gathered in the courtyard of a tavern. Tables are set up with wooden boards, smooth stones, and little sticks, and the intensity on the players' faces could rival generals planning campaigns. You've stumbled into one of the Tang Dynasty's favorite pastimes, board games. The first table you approach features Go, known then as Wakey. The board is a simple square grid, but the stones, black and white, round and polished, are anything but simple once they start to multiply across the lines. Two men sit hunched over, foreheads practically touching the table, while an audience mutters suggestions and gasps at bold moves. You lean in to watch as one player traps his opponent's stones in a neat curve, the sound of the captured pieces clicking into a bowl like a miniature drumbeat of doom. Historians still argue whether the Tang elite treated Go as pure entertainment or as a form of military training in disguise. Judging by the smug look on the winner's face, it feels more like ego training than anything else. You take a turn sitting at the board with a younger scholar who gestures politely for you to play first. You clumsily place a stone on the edge, thinking you're being strategic, only for him to smile, knowingly. Within minutes, your pieces are hemmed in, smothered like dumplings in broth. The crowd chuckles sympathetically, but you can't help noticing that they're clearly rooting for your opponent. Losing gracefully is a skill, and tonight, you learn it the hard way. Next to the Go table is another game, Liubo, which looks at first like a scattering of sticks and dice, but in fact is an older pastime, one that had already begun to fade in popularity by Tang times. The board is decorated with abstract designs, and players cast slender sticks instead of rolling dice, moving their little pieces around in patterns you barely understand. A gray-bearded man explains that it's not just chance, there's strategy here too, though his explanation is so complicated, you begin to suspect it's part performance art. Quirky fact: some ancient texts claimed Liubo wasn't just a game, but a ritual with cosmological meaning, a way to mirror the movements of stars. You nod politely, though to you it looks like chess meets Yahtzee with bonus confusion. A younger gambler nearby shakes his head and whispers that nobody really understands Liubo anymore, but that doesn't stop people from betting on it. You glance at the little pile of coins changing hands after each round and realize that the thrill isn't just about the game, it's about the risk. Gambling was officially frowned upon, but let's be honest. When has a law ever stopped people from making questionable choices? Historians still argue whether Tang authorities tried to clamp down on this habit or whether they turned a blind eye as long as the losers didn't riot. From the smirk on the bearded man's face, you'd guess the latter. At another table, a group of women are playing pitch pot, a game where you try to toss arrows into a narrow vase. Their laughter rings through the courtyard as each miss sends the arrows clattering dramatically across the tiles. You try once, and your arrow bounces off the rim, skittering under a bench. A woman grins and says something that sounds suspiciously like stick to tea drinking. Fair enough. This game is harder than it looks, requiring a steady hand and patience you clearly don't have after all that caffeine. Not far away, two boys are playing a gambling dice game. The dice clatter across the table, numbers called out quickly, and coins slide from one hand to another with the precision of professionals. One boy slaps his forehead at a bad roll, muttering dramatically, while the other pumps his fist like he's just won the lottery. You realize quickly that the spirit of Las Vegas isn't new at all. It's just wearing Tang robes tonight. Back at the Go table, another pair of scholars are in a heated debate about whether the game's true lesson is humility or dominance. One insists that learning to lose gracefully is the point. The other says crushing your opponent without mercy teaches discipline. The audience weighs in loudly, and soon the argument overshadows the actual game. You sip from a nearby jug of tea and chuckle because nothing says ancient leisure quite like people turning a game night into a philosophical symposium. A servant wanders through with a tray of snacks, roasted chestnuts, dried plums, and candied ginger. You pop a piece of ginger into your mouth, sharp enough to make your eyes water, and it jolts you awake, just in time to see someone overturn the Liubo board in frustration. Pieces scatter like shooting stars, and the gray-bearded veteran calmly begins to rearrange them, as if nothing happened. You get the sense he's seen this drama before. The courtyard grows louder as bets increase, coins clink more often, and someone breaks into song. The atmosphere is intoxicating, not because of wine, but because of the shared focus, the tension that comes from watching simple objects, stones, sticks, dice, turn into empires, fates, and fortunes. It dawns on you that these games aren't distractions. They're mirrors of Tang society itself, strategic, risky, poetic, and occasionally absurd. As midnight approaches, the crowd begins to thin. A gambler pockets his winnings with a triumphant grin, while a poet sulks about his latest defeat. You rub your eyes, realizing you've lost track of time completely. The stones, the laughter, the clatter of dice, it all lingers in your ears like the echo of a song you can't shake. You step back into the street, your mind still half on the games you played poorly, half on the stories they carry. The night feels cooler now, quieter, but you know that in another courtyard, another tavern, another hidden corner of Chang'an, someone else is still placing a stone on a board, still tossing dice, still whispering wagers under the lantern glow. The empire hums on, restless, playful, forever finding ways to turn even pebbles and sticks into dramas worth remembering. The morning haze has hardly lifted over Chang'an, yet the streets are already alive with the clop of hooves, the roll of carriage wheels, and the faint jangle of harness bells. You rub your eyes and step into the bustle, because today you're going to witness another peculiar passion of Tang society, racing. Not the kind with sneakers or spandex, but horses bred with almost obsessive care, chariots that roar like thunder, and yes, even donkeys who sometimes got drafted into competitions when people were feeling cheeky. If you've ever shouted at a snail to hurry up during a particularly slow day, you'll understand the energy here. The city itself had designated grounds for races. Wide, flat stretches outside the city gates gave way to horse tracks, and crowds flocked there on festival days. You join the throng, jostled between farmers carrying baskets of snacks, and officials in robes more suited to court debates than to dusty bleachers. The Tang Dynasty adored horses, so much so that they imported breeds from Central Asia, sleek, long-legged creatures prized for both beauty and stamina. A horse here isn't just transport. It's a symbol of prestige, a four-legged ticket to admiration. As you find a spot near the track, you hear a drum roll, then the sudden crack of a whip. The riders burst forward in a flurry of dust and shouts, their robes tied up to avoid tangling, their horses' manes flying like banners. You lean forward, heart quickening, though you don't even have money riding on the race. Gambling is thick in the air, though. Spectators shove coins into each other's hands, bets whispered with more secrecy than state conspiracies. Historians still argue whether the state actively encouraged betting to keep citizens entertained or merely tolerated it as inevitable mischief. Judging from the roar of the crowd, you suspect the latter. One rider surges ahead, leaning so close to his horse's neck that they look fused together. Another wobbles, narrowly avoiding a fall, which elicits a collective gasp, followed by gleeful laughter. It's dangerous, this sport, and yet the danger is half the appeal. You're reminded of modern roller coasters, scary, pointless, and yet irresistible once you're strapped in. Someone beside you claps you on the back, shouting that this is the best race of the season, though you can't tell if that's true or just the wine talking. Between races, performers entertain the crowd. A group of acrobats tumbles across the field, leaping over each other in dizzying arcs. Children chase after stray confetti tossed by vendors. You munch on roasted peanuts, the shells cracking sharply in your fingers, and marvel at how thoroughly the entire city seems devoted to squeezing joy out of speed and spectacle. But not all races involve sleek horses and heroic riders. In smaller neighborhoods, you stumble upon donkey races, which are precisely as absurd as they sound. The donkeys bray loudly, plodding forward with stubborn determination, while their riders kick and coax with increasingly desperate faces. The crowd cheers even louder here, perhaps because the ridiculousness is more relatable than the polished glamour of horse racing. You can't help laughing when one donkey simply stops, mid-race, refusing to move despite the frantic tugs of its rider. If you've ever tried to get your Wi-Fi to work during a storm, you know this kind of stubborn defiance. A quirky tidbit. Some Tang records mention people betting on cricket fights, where tiny insects were treated like miniature gladiators. While you don't see that today, the donkey races feel like they belong in the same family of strange but passionate competitions. People clearly loved anything that could be turned into a contest, no matter the scale. Back on the main track, the final race of the day begins. This one involves chariots, two-wheeled carts pulled at breakneck speed, riders gripping the reins like their lives depend on it, which, frankly, they do. The chariots rattle so hard you're sure they'll fall apart, but somehow they hold. Dust blinds your eyes, and the noise of pounding hooves echoes through your chest like a drumline. For a moment, you forget you're supposed to be a sleepy spectator and feel instead like you're in the middle of a battlefield. And maybe that's the point. For a dynasty that valued both art and war, racing was a perfect blend of elegance and chaos. When the winners finally slow their steeds, sweat steaming from the horses' flanks, the crowd erupts. Coins change hands in a flurry, losers groan, winners strut, and you step back to take in the scene. This is more than entertainment. It's a shared release, a way for thousands of people to feel a single heartbeat. You wander away from the track as the sun dips low, the noise of victory songs trailing behind you. In quieter streets, you see small groups reenacting the day's races with toy horses carved from wood. Children shrieking in delight as they gallop around corners. Even in miniature, the obsession continues. As you reach your lodging for the night, you can still hear the echo of hooves in your ears. You think about the Tang love for horses, the lengths they went to breed and import them, and the cultural weight placed on these races. It wasn't just about speed. It was about prestige, risk, unity, and occasionally ridiculous stubborn donkeys, reminding everyone not to take life too seriously. The Tang Empire, like those pounding hooves, never stood still for long. The sun has barely risen, and yet Chang'an hums with an energy that feels different from the excitement of games or the thundering horse races. Today, the streets smell faintly of ink and mulberry paper, of the faint metallic tang from bronze mirrors freshly polished, and of glue boiled down from animal hide. You're about to drift into another of the Tang Dynasty's peculiar fascinations, puzzles and riddles, those playful tangles of words and logic that made scholars puff up with pride and left ordinary folk scratching their heads like they'd just tried to fix a flat tire with chopsticks. You slip into a tea house where the clink of cups mixes with murmurs of poetry. At one table, scholars sit with brushes in hand, scratching riddles on long slips of paper. These aren't riddles about knock-knocks or rubber chickens. No, they're clever literary creations, weaving metaphors so dense you'd think the writer was paid by the syllable. One riddle compares a candle to a red-faced warrior, slowly losing his head in battle as the night progresses. Another describes the moon as a jade plate washed by heavenly water. You sip your tea, pretending to understand, but secretly, you're relieved you're not being quizzed. Historians still argue whether these riddles served mainly as brain-training exercises for officials or whether they were mostly a way to show off in social gatherings. Either way, you can sense the pride swelling in the room each time someone guesses correctly, like they've just solved the mysteries of the cosmos. A man near you blurts out the answer to a particularly tricky one, earning approving nods from the others while his opponent groans into his sleeve. It's not just a game, it's reputation on the line. Not all puzzles, though, were confined to calligraphy and metaphor. In the corner of the tea house, a craftsman fiddles with a wooden contraption. It's a box with sliding panels decorated with painted dragons. He demonstrates it to curious onlookers, sliding one panel left, another right, until the lid pops open with a satisfying click. You lean closer. It's an early puzzle box, the kind that makes you wonder if the craftsman invented it to delight customers or just to watch them rage in frustration. Quirky tidbit. Tang artisans were famous for inventing intricate locks and mechanisms, not just for security, but also for sheer amusement. A locked chest might contain nothing more than a joke scroll, yet people spent hours trying to outwit the device. You take a turn at the box, tugging and sliding, certain you'll figure it out quickly. 10 minutes later, your tea is cold, your pride is bruised, and the craftsman smiles knowingly as he nudges the final piece into place, opening the lid as easily as peeling an orange. Inside? Just a dried plum. That's it. Your defeat is sweet, sour, and a little sticky. Stepping outside, you follow the sound of children's laughter into an alley where kids are playing riddle games of their own. One child recites a simple puzzle, tall when young, short when old, breathing without lungs. The others shout answers, candle, incense stick, their guesses mixing with the joy of being right, or at least close enough. You smile at how the simplest puzzles carry the same thrill as the elaborate literary riddles inside the tea house. Whether scholar or child, Tang people clearly loved testing their wits as much as their dice. Further down the street, you stumble into a small stall selling wooden brain teasers. Interlocking rings, twisted knots of bamboo, and curious geometric shapes meant to be taken apart and put back together. You pick one up, twist it awkwardly, and feel a pang of recognition. Yes, even in ancient times, there was always that one toy engineered specifically to humble adults. The vendor chuckles as you nearly fling it in frustration, assuring you that some customers have been at it for days. Historians still argue whether these puzzle toys were invented purely for entertainment or as teaching tools in mathematics and geometry. Judging by your experience, you'd say they were designed for comedy. As the day drifts on, you return to the tea house just as the riddling session shifts into a contest. Two scholars face off, one reciting riddles while the other tries to guess them on the spot. The audience leans in, murmuring suggestions, occasionally bursting into applause when someone nails the answer. It feels almost like a rap battle, words flying, pride on the line, and plenty of smug grins exchanged. You half expect someone to drop a bamboo mic. By evening, lanterns glow, and the riddles continue under their soft light. The wax drips, teapots empty, and yet the energy never wanes. People still argue over answers, still tease one another for mistakes, still clap when someone untangles a particularly thorny metaphor. A scholar scribbles down a new riddle, muttering that it will stump his rivals tomorrow, while a farmer at the edge of the crowd scratches his head, clearly just here for the tea. Walking home, you realize how these riddles and puzzles mirror Tang society itself. Layered, playful, ambitious, sometimes absurdly complex, but always hungry for meaning. They weren't just games. They were ways to test wit, to build reputation, to connect minds across cups of tea and across generations. Even your failed attempt with the puzzle box feels like part of that tapestry. Frustration balanced by laughter, pride softened by humility. As the city quiets, you can still hear faint echoes of riddles drifting in the night air. The words tangle in your mind, elusive yet comforting, like lantern shadows flickering on a wall. You know that tomorrow, someone will invent a new puzzle, a new riddle, a new way to challenge the restless Tang imagination. And someone else, maybe you, will once again sit down overconfident, only to be humbled by a box, a metaphor, or a child's clever grin. The moon hovers over Chang'an like a silver coin tonight, and you find yourself drawn into one of the most extravagant spectacles the Tang Dynasty had to offer: banquets. You're not talking about modest meals with a few dumplings and a polite toast. No, Tang banquets are full-throttle sensory feasts where music, dance, fashion, and food collide in a performance that would make even modern wedding receptions look like picnic lunches. The palace, aristocrats' mansions, and even wealthy merchants' courtyards become stages where everyone competes, not just to eat well, but to impress with dazzling excess. You're ushered into a hall draped with silk banners dyed in vivid reds and blues. Lanterns swing overhead, casting soft golden light onto lacquered tables set low to the ground. Platters are already being carried in. Glazed duck glistening with honey, delicate dumplings shaped like lotus buds, and fragrant bowls of noodles that steam with sesame and scallion. The aromas wrap around you like a warm blanket, and your stomach grumbles audibly enough that a servant smirks. You grab your chopsticks, knowing full well that if this were a competition of appetite, you'd definitely medal. The meal hasn't even properly started before the entertainment begins. A troupe of musicians strikes up with the pipa, the guqin, and the flute, weaving melodies that seem to shimmer like the lantern light itself. Soon after, dancers sweep into the hall, their sleeves long and flowing, designed to catch the air as they twirl. One dancer balances gracefully on a single point, sleeve circling like the halo of a comet. You hear a whispered explanation. This is the whirling rainbow skirt dance, famous for its elegance and rumored to have been choreographed under the Tang Emperor's personal patronage. Historians still argue whether the emperor himself ever danced, but given how enthusiastically the audience claps now, you can imagine him at least tapping a royal foot. Between courses, more entertainers appear. A contortionist bends backwards so far his head almost brushes his ankles, prompting gasps. A juggler tosses lacquered bowls in the air, catching them on the edge of a stick balanced on his nose. The crowd erupts with laughter when one bowl nearly crashes into the duck platter, saved only at the last second. You sip fragrant plum wine, sweet and just a bit heady, and feel the room spin with color and sound. As the banquet progresses, the food keeps coming in waves. There are fish molded into elaborate shapes, fruits carved into animals, and sweets dyed into every shade imaginable. You bite into a honey cake shaped like a rabbit, and its sugar glaze cracks between your teeth, melting instantly. Servants refill cups constantly, and the laughter grows louder, looser, more unrestrained. You realize this isn't just about indulgence. It's a performance of wealth, generosity, and power. The more lavish the banquet, the more prestige for the host. At the far end of the hall, a small group engages in poetry contests between bites. One scholar recites a verse about the moon's reflection in a wine cup, while another quickly improvises a response comparing roasted duck skin to autumn leaves. Everyone claps, though you're not entirely sure if the applause is for the cleverness of the verse or for the sheer audacity of comparing poultry to seasonal landscapes. Either way, the scholars beam with pride. Quirky tidbit: Tang banquets often doubled as poetry salons, where the competition to outdo each other with verses was as fierce as the competition to finish the last dumpling. As the night deepens, the entertainment grows more theatrical. Dancers now perform in elaborate masks, switching between fierce warriors and coy maidens in the blink of an eye. The music builds, drums pounding like thunder, flutes shrilling like wind through mountains. It's hypnotic, and you feel yourself swaying along, half asleep, half exhilarated. Somewhere nearby, a man snores quietly into his sleeve, undone by too much wine, but no one bothers waking him. Tang banquets are marathons, and not everyone makes it to the finish line upright. Then comes the final spectacle, a display of shadow puppetry. Behind a silk screen lit from behind, puppeteers manipulate delicate figures carved from translucent hide. Warriors battle demons, lovers part under the moon, dragons coil across the screen. The crowd watches in awe, voices hushed for the first time all evening. The puppets dance across the screen with a grace that feels almost alive, and you realize this banquet is more than indulgence. It's an archive of Tang culture compressed into a single night. Music, poetry, dance, food, drama, all woven into one unforgettable feast. Historians still argue whether these grand banquets were truly accessible to the middle class or reserved only for the elite. Some records suggest merchants with enough wealth could host near palace-level spectacles, while others insist only the nobility had the means. Whatever the truth, tonight you're caught in the middle of it, blinking under lantern light, awash in flavors and stories. When the banquet finally ends, the tables are littered with empty platters, wine stains, and wilted flower garlands. Servants quietly begin clearing while guests stumble out, humming tunes, reciting half-finished poems, or giggling at private jokes. You stretch, your belly full to bursting, your ears still ringing with music, and your heart strangely buoyant. As you step into the cool night air, the lanterns swaying above cast long shadows across the courtyard. The echo of drums lingers in your chest, mingling with the faint sweetness of honey still on your tongue. You know that somewhere, right now, another banquet is beginning. Another hall is filling with dancers and laughter, and the Tang Empire is once again proving that leisure could be as dazzling and as overwhelming as the stars overhead. The night air in Chang'an tastes of smoke and incense as you drift along a crowded street lined with paper lanterns. Tonight isn't just another evening of casual entertainment. It's the Lantern Festival, one of the Tang Dynasty's favorite excuses to turn the city into a living dreamscape. You're swept into the current of people, shoulder to shoulder with strangers who grin at nothing in particular, drunk not only on wine, but on the sheer wonder of light itself. Everywhere you look, lanterns glow like stars brought down to earth. Some are simple, round, red, with painted flowers, but others tower above you. Massive constructions shaped like dragons, phoenixes, or even miniature palaces. You crane your neck to admire one lantern shaped like a lotus flower taller than a horse. Its petals open and close mechanically, revealing flickering candles inside. A child beside you squeals in delight, tugging her father's sleeve to point out every detail. Quirky tidbit. Artisans competed fiercely to outdo one another during the Lantern Festival, often spending months crafting structures so elaborate they risked collapsing under their own ambition. The festival isn't just visual, though. Musicians line the streets, plucking lutes and flutes, their melodies weaving through the laughter and chatter. Vendors shout over the din, offering candied hawthorn skewers, fried cakes dusted with sugar, and sticky rice balls stuffed with sesame paste. You grab one, bite into its chewy warmth, and nearly burn your tongue on the molten filling. A passerby chuckles at your expression, clearly recognizing the universal hot pocket of doom face. But the lanterns hold more than beauty. They're tied to riddles, too. Many are inscribed with clever puzzles that festival goers crowd around to solve. You push into one such group, where a lantern painted with cranes and clouds bears the words, "It has 1,000 eyes but cannot see, and no feet yet it travels swiftly." A man beside you whispers confidently, "A starry sky," while another insists, "It's a net." Arguments fly, voices rising until someone finally points to a slip of paper tied beneath the lantern with the official answer, "A river." The crowd erupts in applause, half impressed, half annoyed they didn't guess it first. Historians still argue whether these lantern riddles were primarily educational tools or simply excuses to showcase poetic cleverness. Judging from the crowd's energy, you'd say both. As you wander further, you notice lanterns of every size floating in the sky, released with whispered wishes. Families gather, writing prayers for health, prosperity, or love before lighting the small flames that carry the paper globes upward. The night fills with drifting orbs, their glow soft and melancholy, like stars unmoored from the heavens. You can't help but imagine modern fireworks fans rolling their eyes. That's it? But there's something hauntingly beautiful in the slow, steady rise of light against darkness. Some neighborhoods organize lantern parades, where enormous structures are rolled through the streets on wheeled platforms. One dragon-shaped lantern snakes along, its body stretching dozens of feet, men hidden beneath pushing it forward, while children run alongside shouting, "It's alive!" The crowd surges forward, swept up in the illusion. For a moment, even you feel like you're watching a real creature of myth slither through the city. A particularly raucous group invites you to join them in releasing a floating lantern on the river. You kneel beside them, placing the fragile paper boat on the water, its flame trembling in the breeze. The lantern drifts away, joining hundreds more bobbing along the dark current. The river becomes a ribbon of fire, weaving through the city like a necklace of stars. You exhale, surprised at how calming it feels, as though your worries have floated away with the little flame. And of course, the festival wouldn't be complete without performances. Stages are set up at intersections, where actors in painted masks perform scenes from popular plays. One troupe enacts a love story under a giant lantern shaped like a moon, their voices carrying over the clamor. A juggler nearby drops his props, only to recover by balancing a lantern on his head, earning twice the applause. Everywhere you turn, spectacle competes with spectacle, leaving you dizzy but grinning. Historians still argue whether the Lantern Festival originated as a strictly Buddhist observance or as a more secular citywide party co-opted by religion later. Either way, by Tang times, it had become both: a night for prayer and play, reverence and revelry, incense and sticky rice balls. As midnight approaches, the festival reaches its peak. Fireworks weren't yet the explosive displays we know today, but small firecrackers snap and pop in the streets, sending children squealing and dogs barking. Sparks shower briefly, reflected in the river below. The combined effect of lanterns above, lanterns on the water, and lanterns lining the streets makes Chang'an look less like a city and more like a galaxy fallen to Earth. Eventually, the crowds thin, vendors pack up their stalls, and the massive lantern constructions are wheeled back into storage or left to collapse dramatically when no one's watching. You walk slowly through the cooling streets, your feet crunching on bits of fallen paper, the smell of burnt wicks lingering in the air. In the distance, a single stubborn lantern still floats upward, smaller and smaller, until it disappears among the stars. You realize that the Lantern Festival isn't just a party. It's a reminder of transience, flames that flicker, drift, and fade, much like empires, much like nights. But while it lasts, it's dazzling, overwhelming, unforgettable. And you, lantern-eyed and slightly sticky with sugar, carry the glow with you as you step back into the quiet dark. By now you've wandered through so many noisy Tang diversions that you might crave a quieter corner, a place where the clatter of dice and the pounding of drums fade into softer sounds. Luckily, the Tang Dynasty had a pastime perfectly suited to slow afternoons and long evenings: tea gatherings. Not just any tea drinking, mind you. This was practically a sport of refinement, complete with rituals, bragging rights, and the occasional debate about whether someone's brew was too bitter or not bitter enough. You settle onto a woven mat in a shaded pavilion, watching the steam rise from a bronze kettle. And you realize you're about to experience the Tang equivalent of a coffeehouse open mic. The host, a scholar in flowing robes, gestures with dramatic flair as he sprinkles powdered tea into bowls. This isn't yet the refined tea ceremony of later dynasties, but a rougher, more experimental stage. People boil leaves, pound them, whip them, or even add flavorings like ginger, orange peel, or salt. Yes, salt. If you're cringing, you're not alone. One Tang poet actually mocked the practice, suggesting that too much seasoning turned tea into soup. You take a sip of the salted version and immediately understand his frustration. It's like your tongue went to the seaside without your permission. Still, there's something calming in the rhythm of it all. Water ladled, bowls passed, steam curling like ghosts above the group. One guest quotes a line of poetry: "Tea is the clear breeze within a cup." Another counters with a joke about tea being a good excuse to gossip without appearing idle. Everyone laughs, the sound mingling with the rustle of bamboo outside. Historians still argue whether tea drinking in Tang times was primarily a health ritual or a social one. Given how eagerly these guests lean into both, it seems the answer might simply be yes. Nearby, a servant unrolls a scroll covered in tiny characters. It's a medical text explaining tea's supposed powers: clearing the head, aiding digestion, calming the spirit. You suspect some claims were exaggerated. No, Tea won't cure heartbreak or make your donkey run faster, but there's no denying the comfort it brings. Your own fatigue begins to soften as the warm liquid trickles down, its faint bitterness sharpening your senses just enough to keep you awake. Between sips, the scholars engage in another favorite pastime: poetry contests. The rules are simple. Compose a line on the spot, often with tea as the theme, and see who can elicit the most sighs of admiration. One man declares, "The tea's aroma curls like mist on distant mountains." Another fires back, "Its bitterness fades like sorrow in the heart of spring." You mutter under your breath, something about your cup, tasting like boiled hay, but wisely keep it to yourself. The last thing you need is a Tang-era scholar duel over your lack of subtlety. Quirky tidbit: records mention that some tea drinkers would arrange flowers and rocks on the table to create tea landscapes, miniature scenes meant to inspire reflection as they sipped. You glance at the modest arrangement before you: a pebble, a plum blossom, and a small branch, and realize it's less about decoration and more about slowing down, forcing guests to notice the beauty in small things. You try, but your pebble mostly makes you think of stubbing your toe. Still, the intention is sweet. As the evening progresses, the tea grows stronger, the poetry sillier, and the conversation more animated. Someone insists tea should only ever be drunk with friends, never alone. Another argues solitude sharpens the taste. Voices rise, hands wave, and for a moment, the tea pavilion feels more like a courtroom. You watch the debate with amusement, sipping steadily, feeling yourself caught between their seriousness and the underlying comedy of grown men arguing passionately about leaf water. At one point, a musician takes out a guqin and begins to play, the notes soft and meandering. The tea, the music, the flickering lamplight, it all blends together into something almost hypnotic. You lean back, listening, your mind wandering as though the strings are plucking at your thoughts themselves. It's a different kind of entertainment from the raucous races or dazzling banquets. Here, the pleasure is quieter, subtler, more inward. Historians still argue whether the Tang truly valued tea more than wine, or whether it was a fad that grew into a tradition later. Judging from the empty jugs of wine tucked discreetly behind a screen in this very pavilion, you'd guess that both had their place. Tea for the mind, wine for the belly. And sometimes, both for the ambitious. By the time the gathering winds down, the bowls are stained with tea rings, the poems scattered across scraps of paper, and the air heavy with the mingled scents of jasmine, smoke, and laughter. Guests bow politely to the host, who beams like he's just presided over a state ceremony rather than a group hangout. You rise, feeling lighter, calmer, and just a little jittery from the sheer volume of tea consumed. Stepping outside, the night greets you with a cool breeze. The city is quieter now, lanterns dimmed, streets less crowded. You carry with you not only the taste of tea, but the echo of voices, the warmth of laughter, and the faint reassurance that even in a world of power struggles and endless rituals, people still made time to sit, sip, and savor the small, steaming joys of life. You rub your hands together against the morning chill as you drift toward a wide, grassy field outside the city walls. The streets of Chang'an have been noisy enough with poets, dancers, and tea enthusiasts, but today the noise takes on a sharper edge. The thundering hooves of horses and the shrill cries of spectators. Polo, or Jeju, as it was called, wasn't just a game in Tang times. It was an obsession. Nobles, princes, and even emperors flung themselves into the sport with the kind of reckless energy that would make any modern coach clutch their whistle in horror. You settle onto a patch of grass, heart quickening as you watch the teams prepare, mallets gleaming in the sun. The horses prance, their manes braided with silk ribbons, their nostrils flaring clouds of steam. Riders sit tall, robes tucked up for mobility, eyes narrowed with focus. A gong sounds, and suddenly the field erupts into chaos. Mallets swing, balls fly, hooves tear up the earth. The crowd roars with delight, cheering for favored teams, gasping at every near miss. You flinch as a rider leans dangerously low in the saddle, smacking the ball mid-gallop. It's part athleticism, part madness. And somehow, despite the risk of broken bones, everyone loves it. A courtier beside you mutters that Emperor Xuanzong himself adored polo, even building private fields within palace grounds. His concubine, Yang Guifei, the one often remembered for her beauty and tragic fate, was rumored to watch with equal enthusiasm, applauding each daring move. Historians still argue whether women played polo as actively as men during this era. Some records suggest noble women did ride and compete, though likely in smaller gatherings. You imagine the spectacle. Elegant ladies with jeweled hairpins galloping fiercely while servants gasp in panic. A strange blend of refinement and risk, like playing football in ball gowns. Polo wasn't the only sport on offer. Across town, you hear rumors of cockfights drawing boisterous crowds. You're not exactly eager to watch feathered gladiators, but the Tang treated the event as high-stakes entertainment. Owners pampered their roosters like prized athletes, feeding them special diets, massaging their legs, and whispering encouragement. When the fight began, the birds leapt and struck with claws sharpened just for the occasion. The crowds went wild, coins changed hands, and more than a few egos shattered alongside feathers. You shift uncomfortably, wishing you could hand each bird a retirement plan and a patch of quiet farmland. And then there were the wrestling matches. Unlike modern wrestling with weight classes and referees, Tang wrestling was a blend of strength and sheer spectacle. Contestants grappled in open courtyards, bodies straining, muscles slick with sweat. The crowd, as always, bet on their favorites, shouting advice as though yelling, "Twist harder," would magically grant the wrestler extra skill. You watch a burly competitor flip his opponent with a thunderous thud and wonder if Tang chiropractors had booming practices afterward. Not all Tang sporting spectacles were violent. Some were more about agility and precision. Archery competitions, for instance, drew massive attention. Warriors demonstrated not just brute force, but elegance, pulling back their bows with calm precision before releasing arrows that whistled across the field. The crowd fell silent, holding their breath until the arrow struck its target, sometimes a straw dummy, sometimes a moving object like a suspended gourd. One particularly daring trick involves shooting arrows from horseback while at full gallop. You nearly choke on your snack when one rider nails the target without even glancing. Show off. Still, the king of Tang sports remained polo, and the risks of it were no joke. Several emperors are said to have suffered injuries, and a few officials met their end because of polo accidents. Imagine explaining that to your ancestors. He died bravely in battle, versus he fell off his horse while chasing a leather ball. Yet the appeal never faded. Nobles treated polo as both exercise and spectacle, an arena where alliances formed and rivalries sharpened. In some ways, it was less about the game and more about who you impressed while playing it. Quirky tidbit. Some records mention polo matches at night, lit by torches planted around the field. You picture the eerie glow, horses' eyes flashing in the firelight, mallets swinging shadows across the grass. It must have looked more like a war scene than a friendly game. Perhaps that was part of the allure. After all, what better way to show off courage than by galloping half-blind at full speed, trying not to collide with another equally reckless aristocrat? As the polo match you're watching draws to a close, the crowd erupts in cheers. A young rider has just scored a final goal with such precision that even the losing side can't help but applaud. Coins jingle as wagers are settled. A eunuch scowls, clearly poorer than when he arrived, while another laughs so hard he nearly spills his wine. Gambling was practically woven into the fabric of Tang sports, with fortunes won and lost on the outcomes of games, matches, and fights. You quietly thank yourself for not betting. Your luck usually runs about as strong as a soggy dumpling. The crowd begins to disperse, chattering about the match and making plans for the next event. Some hurry toward cockfighting pits, others toward archery ranges, and a few toward quieter taverns where they'll relive the highlights with exaggerated hand gestures. You take one last look at the field, its grass shredded and muddy from hooves, and realize these sporting spectacles weren't just entertainment. They were ways for the Tang to channel energy, display status, and let loose in a society otherwise so bound by rules and ceremony. As you wander back into the city, the roar of the crowd fades behind you, replaced by the everyday hum of Chang'an's markets and alleys. The echoes of thundering hooves and flapping feathers linger in your mind, a reminder that even centuries ago, people craved the thrill of competition, the drama of chance, and the sweet satisfaction of cheering for someone else's daring, while you, wisely, remained seated on the sidelines. You wander through Chang'an once more, your ears still ringing from the clamor of polo matches and cockfighting pits. Yet today, the city sounds different. Instead of hooves thundering or gamblers bickering, you hear bells, drums, and the low hum of chanting voices. The air smells of incense, thick and smoky, curling from bronze burners carried high by robed monks. You've stumbled into a Tang festival day, when religion spills into the streets and transforms the entire city into a stage for ritual, devotion, and, let's be honest, more than a little spectacle. The Buddhist procession comes first. Monks in saffron and gray shuffle slowly, each step deliberate, each hand holding either a lantern, a scripture scroll, or a ceremonial staff tipped with jingling rings. Statues of the Buddha, gleaming with gold leaf, are paraded on carved platforms, carried by teams of sweating devotees who chant sutras in rhythm with the drum beats. Children tug at your sleeve, pointing at banners painted with lotus blossoms and heavenly guardians. The crowd presses in, heads bowed respectfully, though a few clever vendors still weave through the masses selling sesame cakes. You're half tempted to grab one, but dropping crumbs on a Buddha statue feels like bad karma. Somewhere ahead, a monk lifts a conch shell to his lips and blows. The deep, wavering note ripples down the street like a wave. The crowd sighs in unison, moved by the sound. Historians still argue whether these public processions were meant more for spreading Buddhist doctrine or for dazzling the masses into awe. Either way, they succeed. You find yourself oddly soothed, even as your feet ache from standing too long. Then the Taoists arrive, and subtle calm gives way to fireworks, literally. Priests in flowing robes of indigo and white stride forward, carrying talismans painted in vermilion ink. They chant invocations to ward off evil, while attendants light bundles of bamboo, which crack and pop with explosive snaps. The sound startles you so badly that you almost leap into the arms of the nearest scholar, who looks equally rattled. This, apparently, is how Taoist rituals clear malevolent spirits, with enough noise to scare away not only demons, but probably anyone within a mile radius. Quirky tidbit. During certain Tang festivals, Taoist performers would swallow burning oil and spit it out in flames, a stunt that blurred the line between religious ritual and street performance. You watch one such performer tilt his head back, cheeks bulging, before spewing fire into the air. The crowd gasps and claps, thrilled, while you can't help muttering, "Great, ancient pyrotechnics with no fire extinguisher in sight." The festival continues with floats representing celestial palaces, pulled by oxen draped in embroidered cloth. On top of one float, actors dressed as immortals toss down charms and slips of poetry to the crowd. Children scramble to collect them, believing the words will bring luck or health. One slip lands near your feet. It reads, "Longevity flows like water." You tuck it into your sleeve, partly for luck, partly because it makes a nice souvenir. As the sun sets, lanterns blossom across the city like stars pulled down from the sky. The Buddhist monks light theirs first, hundreds of tiny flames glowing inside paper shells painted with flowers, bodhisattvas, and celestial animals. Soon, Taoist worshippers add their own lanterns, shaped like dragons, cranes, or turtles, each symbol carrying its own meaning. The streets are alive with light, flickering reflections dancing off shop windows and polished doorways. For a moment, Chang'an looks less like a city and more like a constellation come to Earth. You join the crowd moving toward a broad square where musicians begin to play. The blend of flutes, drums, and bells fills the night air as dancers step forward, their sleeves trailing like smoke. The performance is part offering, part entertainment, a way of expressing devotion through beauty. The crowd sways with the rhythm, some whispering prayers, others simply enjoying the show. You close your eyes, letting the sound wrap around you like a lullaby, with an occasional cymbal crash to keep you awake. Historians still argue whether these Tang festivals blurred the line between religion and statecraft. After all, emperors often sponsored them, using the grandeur of faith to emphasize their own heavenly mandate. To the common people, though, the distinction may not have mattered. Whether blessing, propaganda, or both, the festivals offered a rare chance to step away from daily struggles and bathe in something larger than themselves. A sudden commotion distracts you. A group of Taoist priests begins a ritual involving swords, though thankfully not on each other. They wave the blades in complex patterns, tracing invisible sigils in the air. One priest spins so quickly his robe flares out like a storm cloud. Sparks from firecrackers pop at his feet, creating the illusion of celestial combat. The crowd cheers, though one old woman beside you mutters that these antics are just expensive ways to scare pigeons. You can't help but chuckle. Skepticism clearly isn't a modern invention. Later in the night, families float small lotus lanterns down the river, watching as the flickering lights drift together, then apart, like stars reflected in moving water. You crouch by the bank, slipping a lantern into the current. It drifts for a moment, then bumps clumsily into another, before wobbling downstream. You sigh, amused. Typical of your luck. You can't even get a lantern to float gracefully. Still, there's something tender in seeing hundreds of small lights join together, carrying wishes and prayers into the darkness. As the crowd disperses, you wander back through Chang'an streets, the scent of incense lingering, your ears still ringing from drums and firecrackers. You think about the strange mixture of solemn devotion and carnival excitement you've just witnessed. These religious festivals weren't only about faith. They were about community, spectacle, and the shared experience of standing together under lantern light, whispering prayers, and maybe buying sesame cakes from a sneaky vendor on the side. Your feet are tired. Your clothes smell faintly of smoke, and your heart feels just a little lighter. The Tang knew how to weave belief and celebration into something unforgettable, and you, somehow, have become part of it, even if only as the clumsy visitor who nearly jumped into a scholar's arms at the first crack of firecracker. Your journey through the Tang Dynasty now leads you away from lantern-lit festivals and into a quieter but equally dramatic world, the scholar's desk. While nobles galloped in polo fields and monks filled the streets with incense, countless young men hunched under lamplight, ink-stained fingers trembling as they copied line after line of Confucian classics. You find yourself standing in one such study chamber where the air smells of paper, dust, and desperation. The imperial examination system, Keiju, was one of the Tang Dynasty's greatest inventions, though the examinees themselves might argue it was also one of its cruelest. You sit on a narrow stool, squeezed between candidates who mutter passages of the Analects as though reciting magical incantations. Everyone here dreams of passing the exam, of securing a coveted government post, of lifting their families out of obscurity. But the price? Years, sometimes decades, of memorization, writing, and sheer mental endurance. Imagine your entire career depending on whether you can remember the exact wording of a Confucian passage after 14 sleepless hours. You probably wouldn't survive this test without at least 3 teapots worth of caffeine. The room buzzes with nervous energy. Ink brushes scratch against paper, creating a chorus of tiny swishes. One scholar chews nervously on the end of his brush. Another tugs at his hair as though yanking knowledge straight out of his scalp. Historians still argue whether the exams truly promoted talent or simply rewarded those with the wealth to study endlessly. Looking around, you notice that many of the candidates wear fine silk robes, clearly supported by families wealthy enough to keep them from working the fields. Still, among them, you spot a young man in patched clothes, face gaunt, but eyes burning with determination. He's proof that sometimes, just sometimes, brilliance could break through. The tests themselves cover everything from Confucian ethics to poetry composition. Yes, poetry, because apparently running a government requires the ability to rhyme elegantly about plum blossoms. You watch as one candidate scribbles furiously, composing verses about loyalty and harmony, while another leans back smugly, as though certain his couplets will win him fame. You resist the urge to doodle a stick figure on the exam paper in front of you. Something tells you Tang examiners weren't big fans of modern art. Quirky tidbit. Examinees sometimes carried cheat books, tiny scrolls with minuscule writing hidden in their sleeves. Punishments for getting caught were severe: banishment, humiliation, or worse. Yet the temptation was strong. With so much riding on a single performance, who wouldn't be tempted to sneak in a crib note? You glance at your own sleeve, half expecting a cheat sheet to appear magically. But alas, you're stuck relying on memory and luck, two things notoriously unreliable at 3 a.m. As dawn creeps in, the examiners collect the scrolls, faces stern and unreadable. The candidates slump, some relieved, others despairing. One man bangs his head softly against the desk, muttering that his career is over before it began. Another grins, certain he has impressed. You know better than to guess. The whims of the examiners are as unpredictable as Chang'an weather. A perfectly written essay might fail because of sloppy calligraphy, while a mediocre one might pass because the examiner liked the phrasing. Bureaucracy, it seems, hasn't changed much over the centuries. Outside, the streets teem with families waiting for news. Mothers clutch charms, fathers pace, younger siblings whisper prayers. When the results are finally posted, chaos erupts. Successful candidates are hoisted onto shoulders, cheered as if they've won a military victory. Firecrackers pop, wine flows, neighbors crowd in with congratulations. Meanwhile, those who fail shuffle home in silence, faces blank with disappointment. Some will try again next year, and the year after, until gray hairs streak their temples. Others will give up entirely, retreating to lives of farming, teaching, or quiet bitterness. Historians still argue whether the Tang exam system truly created a meritocracy or simply entrenched elite dominance. Certainly, it gave talented men from lower classes a slim chance, but it also demanded such relentless preparation that only those with support networks could realistically succeed. Yet there's no denying its impact. The exam system became a cornerstone of Chinese governance for over 1,000 years, shaping the very idea of civil service as a career earned through intellect rather than bloodline. As the evening settles, you sit with a group of exhausted candidates in a tea shop. Their eyes are glazed, their voices hoarse, but they still recite lines of poetry as though unable to stop. One jokes that after so many hours of writing, his wrist deserves its own government post. Another mutters that if he sees the word filial piety one more time, he might actually rebel against his parents just out of spite. You laugh softly, recognizing that even in ancient times, students coped with stress the same way, by joking about their misery. The tea arrives, steaming and fragrant, and for a moment, silence reigns. Everyone sips slowly, letting the warmth sink in. You realize that, for these young men, the exam wasn't just about ambition, it was about hope. The hope of shaping the future, of proving themselves, of making their names echo across generations. Success meant honor, failure meant obscurity. And here you are, sitting between them, sipping tea, wondering if you could survive even a single Tang exam question. Spoiler, probably not. As you leave the tea shop, the city feels heavier, burdened by all the hopes and failures written in ink on those exam papers. The wind rustles through the streets, carrying fragments of recited verses, fragments of dreams. You walk on, grateful that your own bedtime history requires no memorization, just a willingness to listen, imagine, and maybe chuckle quietly at the absurdity of poetry exams as gateways to political power. The night air of Chang'an feels gentler after the grueling pressure of the exam halls. You drift toward quieter courtyards, where the clang of temple bells and the cheers of polo fields fade into whispers. Here, in shaded gardens and behind carved wooden screens, another pastime thrives, one far softer but no less intense than sporting or scholarship. It is the art of love letters, of gossip whispered between silk sleeves, of stolen glances across moonlit courtyards. If the Tang Dynasty had an Olympic sport in romance, you're standing right in the middle of its arena. You pause near a plum tree, its blossoms trembling in the breeze. A scholar leans against the trunk, brush in hand, scribbling on delicate paper. He's not drafting an essay on filial piety, thank goodness, but crafting verses that balance admiration with just enough subtlety to avoid scandal. Love letters in the Tang were poetry first, communication second. You imagine him writing, "Your smile bends the moonlight, your shadow makes the lotus jealous." Beautiful, yes, but also a little over the top. Then again, understatement rarely wins hearts in a culture that adored flamboyant expression. The letter is folded carefully and slipped into a sleeve. Now comes the trickier part. Delivery. He glances toward a servant girl who nods, takes the folded note, and scurries off. Minutes later, she returns, empty-handed but smiling faintly. Mission accomplished. Somewhere behind an embroidered screen, a young woman opens the note, eyes darting, cheeks warming. You grin, realizing this is basically Tang-era texting, complete with the nervous wait for a reply. Of course, not all letters traveled so smoothly. Gossip had wings of its own. Courtyards hummed with rumors. Who exchanged glances at last night's lantern festival. Who walked together after tea gatherings, who seemed too distracted during poetry recitals. You overhear two older women trading tidbits, their fans flicking open and shut like punctuation marks. Did you hear? The official's son left a poem beneath Lady X's window. Really? I heard he left it under 2 windows. Both laugh knowingly. You realize quickly that Tang gossip worked faster than any courier service. Quirky tidbit. Some lovers carved messages onto bamboo slips, then hid them in gifts like fruit baskets or silk bundles. Imagine biting into a pear only to find a strip of bamboo declaring eternal devotion. It's either incredibly romantic or a choking hazard, depending on your perspective. You pat your sleeve protectively, grateful that modern love confessions don't usually involve dental risks. Back in the courtyard, a lute begins to play softly. Music, after all, was another weapon of romance. A scholar might serenade his beloved with a pipa melody, while her reply could be a verse slipped discreetly into his hand. Historians still argue whether these exchanges were as common as poetry suggests, or whether most Tang citizens lived far less dramatic love lives. Still, the sheer volume of surviving romantic verses hints that people loved to imagine, if not enact, these elaborate dances of affection. You wander deeper into the garden and find yourself beside a moonlit pond. A young couple stands apart, their conversation nothing more than whispered phrases, but their glances do the heavy lifting. Their sleeves brush once, quickly, like dragonflies skimming water. In this world of strict propriety, even the lightest touch carries more weight than a modern bear hug. You're tempted to cough loudly just to see them leap apart, but decide mercy is the better part of humor tonight. Of course, not all Tang romances were gentle. Court gossip could make or break reputations. One poorly timed rumor could ruin a marriage prospect or spark years of whispered scandal. Servants, neighbors, and even poets carried tales from house to house, feeding the insatiable hunger for stories. Some scholars even wrote entire satirical poems mocking the gossip culture, though ironically, those poems themselves became fodder for new gossip. It's a cycle as endless as the plum blossoms falling into the pond. You sit on a stone bench, imagining what it might feel like to receive one of those letters. The parchment soft in your hands, the ink slightly smudged, the verses daring but not too daring. Do you hide it under your pillow, reread it until the characters blur, or nervously burn it before anyone else sees? Perhaps all three, depending on who's watching. You chuckle, realizing that while the forms change, the fluttery anxiety of new affection hasn't budged in 1,000 years. A servant passes carrying a tray of candles, illuminating the night with golden light. Shadows flicker across carved wooden panels, and suddenly the garden feels like a stage, each person an actor in a quiet drama of longing and rumor. The scholar under the plum tree sharpens his brush for another letter. The young couple by the pond pretends to admire koi while sneaking glances. The gossiping women fan themselves, eyes sharp as hawks. And you, a silent visitor, realize you're watching Tang Society's version of a romantic comedy, equal parts elegance, nerves, and absurdity. Historians still argue whether the Tang Dynasty's obsession with romantic verse reflected actual practice or just literary fashion. Perhaps most love lives were simple, arranged by families, sealed by practical marriage contracts. But even in that case, these letters and whispered tales reveal something deeper: the desire to express, to feel, to dream beyond duty, and maybe, on quiet nights, to scribble a line of poetry and hope it finds the right hands. As you leave the courtyard, the fragrance of plum blossoms clings to your robe. You carry with you the memory of folded notes, sly glances, and rumors drifting through the air like smoke. The Tang loved beauty in every form, whether in gardens, poetry, or in the trembling script of a love letter. And though the centuries stretch long between then and now, you can't help but feel a kinship. After all, who among us hasn't waited nervously for a reply that never came quickly enough? The gossip of Chang'an's courtyards fades as you wander beyond the city gates, your sandals crunching over dry earth. The wide boulevards and lantern-lit gardens give way to dusty roads stretching toward the horizon. Travel in the Tang Dynasty wasn't only for merchants and envoys. It was also a form of leisure, a way to escape the city's clamor and seek inspiration, health, or just a good hot soak. You find yourself in the company of travelers, officials on leave, poets with wanderlust, merchants combining business with pleasure, all jostling along the same caravan route. The road itself hums with possibility. The first stop is a temple tucked into the folds of a mountain. Incense smoke spirals upward, mingling with pine-scented air. Pilgrims climb stone steps, worn smooth by generations of feet. Some chant sutras, others simply breathe deeply, glad to escape bureaucratic duties. You follow them into the main hall, where a colossal Buddha statue gazes serenely over the crowd. The hush is broken only by the clink of coins dropped into offering bowls. You bow slightly, more out of habit than devotion, and catch yourself thinking, this is part religious ritual, part tourism. Historians still argue whether Tang temple visits were truly acts of piety or convenient excuses for a countryside getaway. Honestly, it looks like a bit of both. From there, the road leads to natural wonders. Tang citizens adored landscapes, not just in poetry, but in practice. Mountain retreats drew scholars eager to compose verses about craggy peaks and mist-draped valleys. One poet describes climbing until the clouds lay beneath my feet. Another confesses that he gave up halfway and settled for drinking wine at a scenic overlook. You sympathize with the latter. After all, hiking in layered silk robes seems like an extreme sport in itself. You pause at a riverbank where travelers launch small boats, their sails painted with bright designs. The water sparkles in the sun, fish darting below. Children laugh as they skip stones, while older passengers sip wine and trade stories of distant lands. One man boasts of visiting Dunhuang and seeing caves filled with painted Buddhas. Another describes a mountain spring where the water runs so clear it's said to cleanse the soul. You sip from your flask and decide the wine is probably more cleansing, at least in the short term. Quirky tidbit: Tang hot spring resorts were all the rage. Emperors built sprawling bath complexes, and wealthy nobles followed suit. Imagine steaming pools framed by carved stone, steam rising like a veil, musicians playing softly nearby. Guests soaked away their worries, sometimes for health, sometimes simply for indulgence. One emperor reportedly believed hot springs cured everything from stiff joints to bad moods. You slip into one of the pools, the warmth soaking through your bones, and nearly fall asleep on the spot. Forget polo injuries or exam stress. This is the Tang cure-all you could get behind. Travel also meant food. Roadside stalls offered local specialties, lamb skewers in one region, pickled vegetables in another, candied fruits strung on sticks everywhere in between. You try a tanghulu, a skewer of hawthorn berries glazed in syrup, and nearly chip a tooth on the hardened sugar. Delicious, but also proof that Tang dentistry probably had steady business. As you chew carefully, you overhear fellow travelers comparing snacks like modern tourists, swap restaurant reviews. Some things never change. Further along, you encounter a caravan of merchants carrying Persian glassware and Indian spices. Their brightly dressed camels sway under heavy loads, bells tinkling with each step. You realize travel wasn't only about sightseeing, it was also about connection. The Silk Road pumped lifeblood into the Tang Dynasty, bringing foreign goods, ideas, and entertainment. A traveler could leave Chang'an craving tea and return with a taste for saffron or a new board game picked up in Samarkand. You join a group climbing Mount Hua, one of the sacred peaks. The path winds steeply upward, stone steps clinging precariously to cliff sides. Some pilgrims walk barefoot to show devotion. You cling to the railing just to show survival instinct. The higher you climb, the thinner the air, until finally you reach a temple perched on a ledge. Monks serve tea brewed from mountain herbs, claiming it sharpens the mind. You sip politely, though you're convinced it just tastes like boiled moss. Still, the view, rolling mountains stretching into mist, makes every step worth it. Historians still argue whether Tang travel was primarily elite leisure or whether common people also joined in. Records favor the wealthy, with their detailed poems and diary entries, but it's likely farmers and artisans made local pilgrimages too. You picture families walking together, carrying baskets of food, eager for festivals at temples or markets in nearby towns. For them, travel wasn't about writing verses or chasing inspiration. It was about small joys, a day away from fields, a chance to see relatives, or just a change of scenery. As dusk falls, you settle in an inn along the roadside. The building creaks, the straw mat is lumpy, and the tea tastes suspiciously like yesterday's leftovers. Yet the room buzzes with stories, merchants bragging, scholars reciting, pilgrims praying. You lie back, listening to the chorus of voices and footsteps outside, and realize Tang travel wasn't about comfort. It was about movement, discovery, and the thrill of leaving one's daily life behind for a few days or weeks. The next morning, you continue down the road, dust rising at your heels. The mountains recede, the rivers widen, and the horizon promises more temples, more springs, more whispered tales of wonders just a little farther ahead. You might not have silk robes or a caravan of camels, but you carry something just as precious: curiosity. And in the Tang Dynasty, that alone was enough to send people journeying into the unknown. The road winds you back into the bustling heart of commerce, where marketplaces sprawl across Chang'an and smaller towns like living labyrinths. You step into one such market, your senses instantly overwhelmed by the roar of voices, the clatter of hooves, and the mingling scents of roasted lamb skewers, incense, and freshly lacquered wood. 1,000 distractions pull at you, stalls gleaming with Persian glassware, baskets overflowing with Chinese pears, silk merchants unfurling shimmering bolts in the sunlight. Your eyes dart from one oddity to another, and you realize that Tang markets weren't simply about buying necessities. They were theaters of spectacle, where cultures collided and curiosities tempted even the most frugal passerby. The first thing that catches your eye is a stand displaying glass cups so translucent they look like frozen water. The merchant insists they come all the way from Persia, carried across deserts on camelback. You pick one up, the sunlight bouncing through it like a prism, and can't help but marvel. Glass of this clarity was exotic, a luxury that marked its owner as someone of taste and status. Yet right next door, another stall hawks paper umbrellas painted with bold red dragons, cheerful enough to shade a scholar on his walk home. The pairing feels almost comical, high-end imports beside everyday Tang ingenuity. You wander deeper and find food sellers shouting about candied hawthorn, sesame cakes, and roasted chestnuts. You buy a stick of Tang hulu, careful this time not to crack a molar, and listen as children tug at their mother's sleeves for more sweets. Nearby, a butcher chops mutton with rhythmic thuds, while a spice vendor sneezes dramatically into his saffron. Tang palates craved variety, and the market supplied it. From cumin seeds imported from the West to pungent Sichuan peppercorns harvested closer to home. The stalls promised flavors as wide-ranging as the dynasty's borders. And then, the quirky detail. You stumble across a cage filled with dancing monkeys. The handler bangs a small drum, and the animals hop awkwardly to the rhythm, dressed in tiny silk vests. A crowd gathers, coins clinking into the handler's bowl. Was this entertainment or exploitation? You shrug uncomfortably, but admit it's one of those sights that sticks in memory. Historians still argue whether such performances were truly common in Tang marketplaces, or whether later storytellers exaggerated them for color. Either way, you've now got a mental image that's hard to shake. Little monkeys stealing nuts from inattentive customers when their handler isn't looking. You pass fortune tellers offering to interpret dreams with bamboo slips, their tables cluttered with talismans and slips of paper covered in brushstrokes. Next to them, apothecaries grind herbs into powders, promising cures for everything from headaches to heartbreak. One stall boasts crocodile gall as a miracle ingredient. Another hawks dried geckos. You raise an eyebrow, but notice plenty of buyers eager to hand over coins. The line between medicine and superstition blurs here, and clearly nobody's in the mood to question it. A troupe of musicians occupies one corner, their pipa strings plucked to lively rhythms while flutes wail and drums thump. Shoppers pause, entranced, while children imitate the dancers' twirls. A juggler's act nearby competes for attention, balls flashing through the air, nearly colliding with a man trying to balance on a bamboo pole. You chuckle as one juggler drops a piece of fruit, only for a passing dog to snatch it triumphantly. That's one way to tip your street performers. The market isn't just a local affair, it's a Silk Road showcase. Traders from Sogdia haggle in accented Chinese, their colorful tunics drawing glances. Arab merchants sell exotic perfumes in small bottles, promising that one drop will make even a court lady irresistible. Indian sellers display sandalwood carvings that smell faintly of incense. You realize that to walk through this market is to travel without leaving home, each stall a miniature embassy of foreign culture. But it's not all glamour. A poor farmer squats at the edge, selling bundles of garlic and onions from his field, his goods dwarfed by neighboring stalls of embroidered silk. A widow hawks handmade straw sandals, her voice hoarse from shouting. These modest sellers remind you that not everyone dealt in luxury. Markets were also survival, a place where commoners scraped coins together for the basics. Quirky tidbit number 2, some stalls sold pets. Songbirds in bamboo cages, puppies wagging their tails, even the occasional exotic animal like a parrot trained to mimic speech. You overhear one parrot squawk something that sounds suspiciously like, "Pay now," which makes the merchant beam. You're not sure if that's clever training or just the bird's favorite phrase. Either way, it seems Tang people couldn't resist a bit of novelty in their shopping carts. Well, baskets. As you weave through the press of bodies, a sudden drumbeat signals the market's curfew. Guards begin ushering vendors to pack up, reminding you that Tang authorities tightly regulated city life. Chang'an's markets were scheduled to open and close at fixed times, and anyone lingering too long risked fines. Still, as stalls shutter and lanterns are snuffed, you sense the day's chaos lingering like perfume in the air. The memory of coins exchanged, laughter shared, and strangers brushing shoulders doesn't fade with the night. Historians still argue whether Tang marketplaces were purely economic engines or if they also acted as cultural stages. The truth seems obvious to you. Both. They were bazaars where goods changed hands, but also arenas where people flaunted, performed, experimented, and sometimes even fell in love. Imagine a scholar spotting a courtesan buying silk, or a child forever remembering the day he tasted his first sugar-glazed fruit. These were moments of humanity stitched into the dynasty's fabric as surely as silk threads in a robe. By the time you finally step back onto the main street, your purse feels lighter, but your senses are stuffed full. glass cups, candied hawthorn, parrots yelling like street hawkers, and saffron that made a spice seller sneeze. It's a kaleidoscope of memory, one that makes you realize marketplaces weren't just about things. They were about the drama of people, of strangers meeting and parting, of cultures rubbing shoulders in stalls of silk and dust. And as the lanterns fade behind you, you can't help but grin. Even if you leave empty-handed, you've taken home a story. The marketplace fades behind you, but the night in Chang'an is just beginning. You slip into the city streets after sunset, when the lamps flicker to life and shadows stretch like ink across the cobblestones. By law, the capital has a strict curfew, guards patrolling to ensure everyone is tucked safely at home. But you, like many curious Tang citizens, know the truth. Rules exist to be bent. Nightlife is alive, humming beneath the surface, waiting for those bold enough to seek it. Your first stop is a tavern, hidden behind a modest wooden door, its interior glowing with lanterns. Inside, scholars and officials sip rice wine, their voices slurring as they trade lines of poetry. You slide onto a bench, the wooden surface sticky with spilled drink, and find yourself nodding along as a drunken man recites a poem about the moon's reflection in his cup. You raise your own drink, catch the pale disk mirrored in the liquid, and admit he's not entirely wrong. The Tang loved their moonlit metaphors, and here, under a haze of alcohol, you start to see why. On the street outside, acrobats perform beneath the lantern light. One balances on a bamboo pole while juggling knives. Another flips backward onto a partner's shoulders. Children squeal, adults clap, and a group of guards pretend not to notice that the performance has gathered a crowd past curfew. Historians still argue whether officials really enforce those rules strictly, or if, like many bureaucratic laws, they were honored more in the breach. From the laughter around you, the answer seems clear. Further down the lane, you follow the sound of music. A small garden lies behind a high gate, its entrance guarded by silk curtains. Inside, courtesans, in bright robes, pluck at pipa strings, their long sleeves fluttering as they move. Patrons lounge with cups of wine, captivated by the music and conversation. You wander through, careful not to draw attention, and notice how the air smells of sandalwood and plum blossoms. A lady catches your eye, smiles knowingly, and returns to her instrument. You suddenly understand how these hidden gardens became sanctuaries from the rigid etiquette of court life, a place where wit, charm, and artistry thrived as much as beauty. Of course, not every night pursuit is so refined. You overhear shouts and follow them to a courtyard where young men bet on dice games. The cubes clatter across a lacquered board, cheers and groans rising with every roll. A loser slams his fist into the table, coins scattering onto the ground. One dog darts forward, snatches a coin in its mouth, and runs off to collective laughter. You can't help but grin. Apparently, Tang nightlife wasn't just about poetry and pipa. It was about losing your wallet to both gamblers and opportunistic pets. Quirky tidbit: some brothels in Chang'an offered not just companionship, but elaborate themed rooms, decorated to mimic distant lands. One was said to recreate a Sogdian desert tent, complete with sand on the floor. Another mimicked a mountain retreat, with painted cliffs and a trickling fountain. Imagine sipping tea while trying not to get sand in your cup. You don't step inside, but the stories alone prove the Tang had a flair for theatrical indulgence. Back on the main street, lantern vendors walk by, selling glowing paper spheres painted with flowers or animals. Children chase them, squealing as candlelight flickers inside. The glow bounces off shop windows and tiled roofs, giving the night an almost dreamlike quality. You carry one lantern briefly, the thin paper warm in your hand, before passing it to a boy who stares at it with wide eyes. His delighted shout is worth more than the few coins it cost. You slip into another tavern, this one rowdier. Here the air reeks of roasted meat and spilled ale. Drummers pound out a beat, while dancers in bright skirts twirl, their movements fast enough to make the room blur. The crowd claps along, some singing off-key. You join in, your voice blending into the cacophony. At one point, a man tries to stand on the table and proclaim himself emperor. He promptly falls backward, spilling soup onto an unsuspecting neighbor. The room roars with laughter, and you realize humor was as much a part of Tang nights as art or gambling. Historians still argue whether ordinary citizens had easy access to nightlife, or if it was mostly the domain of elites with time and money to spare. Certainly, the grand gardens and courtesan halls leaned wealthy, but the taverns and street performers, those welcomed anyone with a few coppers and a thirst for diversion. You like to imagine artisans, farmers, and servants sneaking out after long days, chasing a brief moment of joy under the moon. You wander toward the city walls, where the streets grow quieter. In a secluded alley, you hear faint chanting. A group of Taoist practitioners gathers around a brazier, tossing herbs into the fire and murmuring prayers. The flames crackle green, sparks spiraling upward. The sight feels both mystical and slightly unnerving, as if you've stumbled into a secret better left undisturbed. You step back silently, letting the ritual fade behind you. Finally, you return toward your lodging, weaving past stragglers still awake. The air is cooler now, the moon high above, casting Chang'an's rooftops in silver. Somewhere in the distance, a pipa plucks one last song, while laughter drifts faintly from a tavern. You realize Tang nightlife was a mosaic. Taverns, gardens, dice games, rituals, laughter, and poetry all coexisting in the shadow of curfew. You've seen it all tonight, the hidden joys of a city that refused to sleep, even when the laws said it should. As you close your door, the lantern light fading, you think, no one really survives a night in Chang'an without a story to tell. You wake the next morning still hearing faint echoes of laughter and pipa strings, but now the streets are quieter, filled not with poets stumbling home, but with healers opening their shops. The Tang Dynasty was a place where medicine, superstition, and everyday life blurred into one swirling concoction of remedies and rituals. You step into an apothecary's stall, the air thick with the scent of dried roots and incense, and immediately feel as if you've wandered into both a pharmacy and a fortune-teller's den. Wooden drawers line the walls, each labeled with brushstrokes that promise secrets to health. The apothecary greets you, his sleeves rolled back, hands stained faintly from grinding herbs. He opens a drawer, pulls out ginseng, and explains it's good for vitality, though his wink suggests he thinks you know exactly what kind of vitality he means. Next, he shows you dried chrysanthemum, boiled into tea to soothe the eyes. You nod, realizing Tang people drank medicine like they drank poetry, steeped in metaphor as much as in practicality. But it's not all familiar. On another shelf, lies powdered tiger bone, used for strength, and dried seahorses, believed to cure fatigue. You pick one up, its curled tail brittle, and wonder who first decided this little creature held medicinal power. The apothecary shrugs as if to say, "Don't ask, just pay." Historians still argue whether Tang medicine was truly effective science or mostly placebo wrapped in poetic packaging. Judging by the seahorse, you lean toward the latter. Across the street, another healer sets up shop, offering acupuncture. You watch as fine needles slip into a patient's skin, the man lying still as if suspended between sleep and pain. The healer assures the crowd that qi, the body's life energy, flows more freely this way. Someone jokes that the patient looks like a pincushion, and the healer glares, reminding everyone this is serious art. You suppress a smile, though the man on the table grins faintly too, as if he knows the joke is half true. Quirky tidbit. Some Tang women used ground jade as a face powder, not just for beauty, but for health, believing it cooled the body and warded off illness. Imagine carefully dabbing precious stone dust onto your cheeks in the morning, hoping it doubles as skincare and medicine. Meanwhile, others smeared crocodile dung mixed with oil to block the sun, convinced it worked like sunscreen. You pause and think, you'd almost rather risk the sunburn. Wandering further, you encounter a street vendor selling charms. He waves strips of yellow paper inscribed with Taoist spells, claiming they can prevent nightmares or chase away fevers. He dips one into water, stirs, and tells a mother to make her child drink it. You cringe at the thought of ink-flavored tea, but the mother pays gladly. Belief, after all, can be its own medicine. Scholars today still debate whether these charms were taken seriously or treated as symbolic comfort. Standing here, you see comfort itself is sometimes the cure people seek. In a nearby courtyard, a group gathers for breathing exercises, early forms of Qigong. Their arms sway in unison, their breaths slow and deliberate. You join in briefly, feeling a wave of calm. A man tells you these movements keep the organs balanced, the spirit centered. Maybe it's superstition, maybe it's proto-yoga, but either way your shoulders feel looser afterward. Sometimes medicine doesn't need needles or powders. Sometimes it's just remembering to breathe. Not all remedies are so tranquil. You hear rumors of exorcisms performed to cure illnesses believed to be caused by malevolent spirits. One account describes Taoist priests shouting, banging drums, and waving swords in circles around the patient, demanding the spirit leave. You picture being sick with a fever only to have your room turned into a percussion concert. Effective or not, it probably at least scared the neighbors into thinking twice about visiting. Still, Tang medicine did record real progress. Doctors compiled great medical texts, such as the newly revised Materia Medica, cataloging hundreds of plants, minerals, and animal parts. They debated treatments, shared case studies, and even practiced surgery with primitive tools. One physician reportedly stitched wounds using silk thread, though anesthesia usually meant a strong dose of alcohol and a prayer. You imagine yourself on the table, someone holding you down while a surgeon squints at your arm with a bronze scalpel, and suddenly those herbal teas seem more appealing. You duck into a bathhouse, another pillar of Tang health. Hot springs weren't just for pleasure. People believed soaking eased ailments from arthritis to melancholy. You slip into the water, steam curling around you, and nearly melt into sleep. A man beside you insists this particular spring cures weak bones, while another swears it improves poetry. You don't argue. After all, your aching feet already feel better, and if you suddenly produce a brilliant verse, you'll know whom to thank. Historians still argue whether Tang citizens genuinely distinguished between medical science and spiritual ritual, or if they saw them as two threads of the same tapestry. Standing here, between the apothecary's powders, the priest's charms, and the bathhouse's steam, you realize the distinction probably didn't matter. Health was about balance, body, spirit, and sometimes wallet. If jade dust, crocodile dung, or chanting made someone feel restored, that was medicine enough. As you step back into the street, lanterns flickering to life again, you catch the mingling scents of herbs, incense, and roasting food. Somewhere a healer sharpens his needles, somewhere else a priest prepares his talismans. The city itself feels like one great body, breathing, sweating, curing, laughing, and sometimes limping. And you, wandering its veins, can't help but feel you're part of the cure too, simply by noticing how humanity has always tried, sometimes earnestly, sometimes absurdly, to heal itself. The scent of herbs and incense still lingers as the year begins to turn, the city shifting its rhythms with the seasons. In the Tang Dynasty, the calendar wasn't just a way to mark taxes or court appointments. It was a cycle of rituals, feasts, and amusements that carried people through the year. You find yourself swept into this tide, joining citizens as they light lanterns, fly kites, and feast on foods that taste of both survival and celebration. Each festival is less a holiday break and more a performance of culture, where tradition and pleasure blend into one long, delicious excuse to skip work. Spring arrives with the Lantern Festival, the 15th night of the first lunar month. You wander the streets of Chang'an and find them transformed into rivers of light. Lanterns shaped like fish, flowers, and dragons sway above your head, some towering stories tall. The glow makes the night shimmer like a second day. Couples stroll arm in arm, children race with paper globes swinging from sticks, and poets mutter verses about how the moon looks jealous tonight. A troupe of acrobats spins flaming lanterns on poles, sparks showering the crowd. Historians still argue whether lantern designs in this era reached the colossal size described in poems, or if writers simply loved exaggeration. Judging from the one shaped like a two-story lotus that nearly topples over, exaggeration seems at least partly true. A few weeks later, you join families climbing hills for the Cold Food Festival. Fires are extinguished, and everyone eats only cold dishes for a day or two. You chew on chilled noodles and pickled vegetables, your teeth chattering, not from cold food, but from the brisk spring air at the hilltop. Children fly kites, painted like hawks, their strings tangling as they tug against the wind. Some kites even whistle, thanks to reeds tied along the strings, turning the sky into a giant flute. You can't resist trying one, though yours dives straight into a tree. A boy laughs and offers to help, his own kite soaring smoothly. It's a reminder that seasonal rituals weren't only solemn, they were playgrounds for joy. As summer rolls in, heat thickens the air and people flock to riversides. The Dragon Boat Festival bursts into motion, drums pounding as long boats shaped like dragons slice across the water. You watch rowers strain in unison, sweat and river spray glittering under the sun. On shore, Families unwrap packets of sticky rice dumplings stuffed with dates or pork, their fragrance competing with incense burned in memory of the poet Qu Yuan. You bite into one and nearly burn your tongue, laughing at the irony of hot dumplings on a sweltering day. Yet tradition demands it, and you chew anyway, deciding that nostalgia beats logic every time. Quirky tidbit: summer was also prime time for pest control rituals. People hung bundles of mugwort and calamus on doors to ward off disease and evil spirits. Some even wore tiny scented pouches filled with herbs as amulets. One merchant proudly shows you his pouch shaped like a tiger, claiming it scares away mosquitoes. You swat one buzzing by your ear and mutter that you're not convinced, but he beams with confidence nonetheless. Autumn brings the Mid-Autumn Festival, a night devoted to the full moon. You sit with a family in their courtyard, biting into mooncakes stuffed with nuts and seeds. Sweet wine flows, and someone points upward at the glowing orb. Children giggle at tales of the moon goddess Chang'an, said to live up there with her rabbit. One girl insists she can see the rabbit pounding medicine with a pestle. You squint, and maybe after a few more cups of wine, you almost believe it too. Poets use the night as an excuse to wax lyrical, comparing the moon to jade discs, mirrors, and polished bowls. You take a simpler approach. It's big, it's bright, and it makes your wine taste better. By winter, the rituals shift toward warmth and survival. The Laba Festival arrives first, when people simmer porridge with grains, beans, and dried fruit. You sip the thick, nutty broth and feel it sink into your bones like edible firewood. Then comes the grand New Year. Streets explode with firecrackers, their sulfur smoke choking and dazzling in equal measure. Families paste red charms on doors, children clutch coin-filled envelopes, and feasts stretch late into the night. You gorge on dumplings shaped like little purses, said to bring wealth, and can't help but joke that you'll accept payment in dumpling form any day. Historians still argue whether Tang celebrations looked much like ours today, or if later dynasties layered on extra traditions. The truth probably lies somewhere between. Yet as you watch fireworks bloom above Chang'an's walls, you feel a familiarity that bridges centuries. The same laughter, the same overeating, the same wish that next year will be kinder. Not all rituals are joyous. Some reflect the harsher side of seasons. Winter also brings heavy banquets of mutton, eaten to keep the body warm. You tear into a greasy slab, grease dripping down your chin, and wonder how anyone stayed slim with diets like this. Farmers, meanwhile, offered sacrifices for good harvests, burning grain and wine before ancestral tablets. The crackle of fire in the icy air feels both sacred and pragmatic. Better to feed the ancestors than risk their disapproval when spring planting arrives. Quirky tidbit number 2. Kite flying wasn't just for spring fun. In autumn, some believed cutting the string mid-flight released illness and misfortune into the sky. You imagine your troubles dangling from the tail of a kite, floating away over the city walls. It's a surprisingly satisfying thought, even if it leaves you kiteless. Through it all, you notice that Tang's seasonal rituals aren't about rigid uniformity. They shift with regions, families, and moods. Some households burn incense obsessively, others focus on food, and still others just look for excuses to sing, drink, and laugh. The thread tying them together isn't exact tradition, but the shared rhythm of living through the year together. As the year closes and you sit at another New Year's feast, belly stuffed, ears ringing from firecrackers, you realize these rituals stitched people into a tapestry. The markets, temples, rivers, and skies all became stages for joy, remembrance, and hope. And as you lean back, listening to children shriek with glee at sparklers, you think, whether it's mutton in winter or lanterns in spring, people will always find ways to celebrate being alive. The lantern smoke drifts away, the dumpling bowls sit empty, and yet your journey through Tang Pastimes lingers in your mind. You have wandered bustling markets, leaned over steaming teapots, scribbled poetry in taverns, lost bets at board games, watched dancers bend like willow branches, and drifted through a year of rituals. Now, as echoes of laughter and music fade, you begin to wonder, which of these delights has truly vanished, and which still lives on in corners of your own modern world? The answer is both comforting and curious, for Tang leisure seems at once distant and familiar, like a tune you almost remember. Start with tea. That frothy green liquid that courtiers once whisked into bowls has not disappeared. It has conquered the globe. You sip your morning tea in a modern cafe and realize you are reenacting a 1,000-year-old habit, though now the foam comes from a barista's clever wrist rather than a monk's meditative whisk. The flavors may differ, the vessels may have changed, but the ritual of gathering around tea to converse, relax, and pause has hardly aged. One Tang official complained that people were wasting too much money on fancy tea leaves. Your friend complains the same about overpriced matcha lattes. Some debates never end. Poetry contests, too, live on, though the stages are different. Instead of courtyards lit by lanterns, people now trade verses on glowing phone screens. Social media feeds have become modern taverns, where words fly faster than wine. Tang poets once matched wits by moonlight. Today's writers challenge each other with hashtags and prompts. The tools have changed, but the urge to craft beauty from syllables remains stubbornly human. Fashion fads? If you swap Tang silk sleeves for today's streetwear, the rhythm looks the same. Trends erupt, spread, and vanish before anyone can fold last season's clothes. You recall how wide sleeves once symbolized grace until narrower cuts became stylish, just as baggy jeans give way to skinny jeans and then circle back again. In Chang'an, imported boots from Central Asia caused a stir. In your world, sneakers drop in limited editions, selling out within hours. Somewhere, a Tang merchant and a modern hype beast would understand each other perfectly. Even Tang cosmetics, odd as they sound, echo into the present. No one smears crocodile dung for sunscreen now, thankfully, but the desire to paint faces, experiment with colors, and trust bizarre beauty treatments endures. The Tang preference for red rouge and powdered skin may seem extreme, yet scroll through any online beauty tutorial and you'll spot similar obsessions, new ingredients wrapped in ancient hopes. Beneath the powders and creams lies the same wish: to capture attention, to glow a little brighter under lantern light or ring light. Music and dance carry on most vibrantly. The instruments differ: lutes replaced by guitars, drums by subwoofers. But the drive to sway bodies in rhythm hasn't dimmed. The Tang loved watching performers from distant lands bring exotic dances to court. Today, you attend concerts where global beats collide: K-pop beside Afrobeat, jazz beside EDM. The Tang cosmopolitan spirit, eager for novelty, resurfaces in every music festival poster plastered on your city walls. As for games, the board may change, but the thrill remains. The Tang played Go, chess like Liubo, and gambling dice. Now, people clutch controllers and tap touchscreens, yet the stakes are the same. The risk of loss, the spark of victory, the endless hours lost to obsession. You imagine a Tang scholar skipping studies for a round of Liubo, his excuses echoing those of a student today who swears just one more game of esports before bed. Across time, procrastination remains undefeated. Nightlife offers another bridge. In Chang'an, curfews tried to shut down late wanderings, but secret taverns and gardens still thrived under the moon. Today, cities hum with neon bars, late-night food stalls, and hidden lounges that authorities pretend not to notice. Whether in lantern-lit alleys or LED-lit clubs, people always carve spaces for midnight laughter. The forms shift, but the hunger for after-dark adventure continues. Seasonal rituals may seem the most different, yet their bones still stand. Lanterns still float during festivals across East Asia. Mooncakes are still shared. Kites still flown. Fireworks still crackle on New Year's Eve. Your own calendar may hold different holidays, yet the rhythm feels parallel. Gatherings marked by food, music, and fire to push away the dark. Where Tang citizens once cut kite strings to release misfortune, you might scribble resolutions on paper and burn them, sending worries into smoke. Rituals adapt, but the yearning to reset, to renew, binds centuries together. Historians often argue about details, whether Tang lanterns really towered 2 stories, whether polo was as wildly popular as the poems claim, whether cosmetics contained jade powder or something duller. Yet when you stand in the middle of these echoes, the exactness feels less important. The essence is clear. People then, like people now, craved moments of wonder, joy, distraction, and beauty. They built festivals and games, dances and feasts, not just for survival, but for meaning. Quirky parallels pop out everywhere. A Tang merchant showing off a scented tiger amulet against mosquitoes reminds you of someone today waving citronella candles at a barbecue. A Tang noble, obsessed with foreign boots, mirrors someone today camping overnight for a sneaker release. A Tang poet drunk on plum wine sounds suspiciously like a friend tipsy texting half-rhymed verses after midnight. These small absurdities make history feel less like a dusty textbook and more like a mirror smudged with time. What has vanished? Certainly some things. You no longer find 2-story lanterns collapsing into city streets. Court dances with foreign acrobats have faded into museum exhibits. The cold food festival has mostly disappeared, though echoes survive in regional traditions. The tang of lamb fat eaten to stave off winter chills may not suit modern diets. Yet even these losses carry a strange presence. You glimpse them in other customs, other kitchens, other celebrations, like ghost threads still woven into the larger cloth. And what endures? Nearly everything at its core. The tools are different, but the instincts unchanged. We still drink together, sing together, argue about art together, invent games together, feast through seasons together. We still chase beauty, novelty, and laughter as if these were survival needs. Perhaps they are. As your imagined journey through Tang leisure closes, you picture yourself sitting on a low wooden stool in Chang'an, moon overhead, dumpling in hand, listening to distant music. Then the vision shifts. You're at a street festival in your own city, lanterns strung overhead, food sizzling, music pulsing, friends laughing beside you. Time folds, and you realize the line between past and present is thinner than you thought. The Tang Dynasty may have ended, its walls crumbled, its poets turned to dust. Yet its pastimes linger, reincarnated in our own days, disguised but alive. They remind you that while empires rise and fall, people's longing to celebrate, to play, to wonder, persists. The lanterns may change shape, but the glow remains the same. And perhaps that is the truest legacy. Not palaces or politics, but the enduring heartbeat of joy.